I am the Comics Kid 2099, the clone of Superman! And I'm here to talk to you about Young Justice, the first episode, titled Independence Day. I want to first talk about some things that I liked about this episode. Number one, I liked that at the beginning you have 4 sidekicks and they're all getting ready to join the Justice League. That's not what I liked. 4 sidekicks, the founding members of the Teen Titans. Well, sort of. Arsenal / Red Arrow / Speedy / Roy Harper originally was not a member of the Teen Titans, but later retcon said that he was a founding member. I really liked that without going overboard with this fan service, they gave us something that we could say, oh, I see what they did there. I like that. It was clever, but they weren't putting too much into it. I thought that was good. However, I feel like this episode of the series was trying to do too much. There were 15, 20 characters who showed up, and some of them don't have any lines, so it's okay to call them not really characters at all. But some of them, I just feel like they're wasting screen time that could be devoted to other characters. You have all 4 of these ICE bad guys, and they all 4 are attacking their respective cities that they terrorize on the same day that the Teen Titans are going to be inducted into the Justice League. Why? Why are they doing this? Batman says that the Justice League is going to go investigate this, but it never comes up. I don't know if it comes up in a later episode. Maybe I'll find out when I keep watching this show. But I really feel like this is just a way to introduce us to all of our characters, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Batman and Robin could have been fighting the Riddler. It could have been anybody. The Flash could have been fighting Mirror Master with Kid Flash. Basically, this was just a really cheesy opening to the episode. I don't mind showing all of these superheroes with their respective sidekicks in the throes of battle just to introduce us to them, but trying to make a connection between these ICE bad guys that ultimately is never explored, I felt like that didn't have to happen. Basically, I thought this show was trying to do too much. Now, I haven't watched beyond the 2nd episode of this series, but I don't like that in the first episode, you've got all of these characters, one of them who leaves the episode after like 3 minutes in. Some of them aren't even explored at all. If I've never read the comic books, I don't know anything about Green Arrow. He's just a more lighthearted version of Batman, basically, and he shoots an arrow. I shouldn't have to rely on my knowledge of the comic books to be enjoying this episode. Something that I've always liked about cartoons that predate this series, like Teen Titans or Justice League Unlimited, was that you didn't have to be a fan of the comic books to enjoy them. You could watch an episode of Teen Titans and you understood who all of these characters were, and while it might not have been 100% true to the comic books, it was capturing the spirit of the comic. This show, it tries to introduce all of the characters, and it tries to introduce a plot that they're going to be, I guess, combating for the whole series, and it tries to introduce character relationships. Now, to be fair, that's always hard, live action or animated, to do in a pilot. It's never easy to introduce your premise, your characters, and the conflict that they're going to be dealing with throughout the whole series. But I feel like this episode could have condensed itself a little bit, taken some things out that didn't need to be there, and focused more on those things, and it could have done a better job. As I mentioned, there are too many characters here. When the episode starts off, you have Speedy, Aqualad, Kid Flash, and Robin. But then, 3 minutes in, Speedy leaves, apparently leaving Green Arrow for good, and we never see him again. I don't know if he shows up later and he's kind of the bad attitude Fonzie of the group. I really felt like his presence was wasted here. Why even bother introducing him if, A, you're going to be introducing us to a character called Arrowette sometime down the line, and B, you're not even going to be using him in the team. Everything I had seen from the promo material predating this episode seemed to indicate that he wouldn't even be a member of the team. It was going to be Superboy, Miss Martian, Kid Flash, Robin, Aqualad. It wasn't going to be Speedy and the Teen Titans. Basically, If I wanted a show or a TV series with hundreds of characters who don't get enough screen time and convoluted plots, I would read the comic books. In fact, I do read the comics. I get that in the comics. When I go to an adaptation of the comic books, I don't want that. I want it to be simplified and easy to understand. I consider myself to be fairly knowledgeable about comic book characters and their history, but I don't want all of that history to be carried over into a cartoon. When I watch a cartoon about the Teen Titans or Young Justice, I want it to be simplified so that my parents who don't even read comic books can watch it and they can understand what's going on. And I, who do read comics, can watch it and I can say, hey, that might be a callback to a comic book, but it doesn't bog down the episode. This episode ultimately suffered by giving some characters quite a bit of screen time and some characters almost no screen time at all. Speedy, as I mentioned earlier, just feels like a throwaway cameo, and it's really pointless putting him in this episode. Then you have the Martian Lady Hunter, who has a line of dialogue, and I'm thinking, why bother even putting her in the episode? She's been here for 30 seconds. Why not just give her to us in the next episode? These characters really should have been introduced earlier in the plot so that we could have gotten a better idea of how the character dynamics are going to play out for this series, instead of being told, oh, well, you'll get that in the next episode. I feel kind of cheated whenever one of the main characters of the show isn't even given to us until literally right before the closing credits. And then you have some characters like Kid Flash and Robin. In the comics, I don't really feel like these two characters are very similar. They're good friends, but I don't think that there's any problem telling them apart as far as personality goes. But here, in this episode, I couldn't really tell them apart. Robin was kind of this jokey, sarcastic sidekick, and Kid Flash was a little bit more boring than that. I don't really have any words that I can use to describe Kid Flash. I can't say, oh, he's the brave one, he's the big guy, he's the cool-headed technology guy. I can kind of do that with some of the other characters. Aqualad is the stoic leader guy. Superboy is the angry Michelangelo of the team. And Robin, I guess, is the cool-headed sarcastic guy, maybe. I really think that this episode should have done a better job of differentiating these two characters. Maybe it does a better job in later episodes, but just right off the bat, if I wasn't a comic book reader, I wouldn't know anything to differentiate these two. I would be afraid that this whole series was going to just give us characters who are too similar to each other, with not enough to make a character dynamic that's interesting. Take the Teen Titans cartoon, for example. You had 5 characters. Starfire, she was happy and gleeful all the time, as Raven was very dour and just kind of bleak. Cyborg was the big jock who liked to eat, Beast Boy was the incurable prankster, and Robin was the stoic leader guy. Now, regardless of how you feel about that cartoon, there was no overlap of these personality types. It was very easy in any given episode to tell what kind of characters you were dealing with. I can't say the same thing about Young Justice, unfortunately. Character dynamics thrive when you have characters who are different and kind of have conflict with each other. They don't have to be punching each other in the face, but if you've got one guy who's a teetotaler and one guy who's an alcoholic, they might be best friends, but they might always be butting heads with each other. And I feel like we needed something along those lines here in this episode. We really didn't get anything like that. Now I want to talk a little bit about the plot of this episode. The Justice League is picked today to take all 4 of these sidekicks and indoctrinate them into the Justice League. This doesn't make sense for a couple of reasons. One, it's very clear to all of them that the Justice League isn't really planning on doing anything but giving them a tour. Speedy says as much in the episode. So why does Batman and Green Arrow and Martian Manhunter, why do they even bother doing this? Is it just to make their sidekicks happy? I don't really understand why they would have any reason to show their sidekicks the headquarters if they didn't plan on also taking them on missions, debriefing them on what's going on, things like that. It doesn't really make sense that all 4 of these guys would be taken into the League on the same day. In real life, maturity doesn't really work like that. What if Aqualad was a lot more mature than Robin and Kid Flash? What if he was ready to be taken into the League, but these other 2 guys still had 2 more years of being a sidekick before they were ready? In the comics, there wasn't really this whole thing where and they were all going to graduate in the same year. it wasn't really a school or anything like that. It was more of an informal thing. It doesn't really make sense that these four guys would all be taken into the league when very clearly they've all got different personalities, different styles of fighting crime. In theory, Aqualad might say, I think my sidekick is ready, and Batman might say, Robin's never going to be a member of the league. It doesn't really make a lot of sense that all four of them would be taken into the league on the same day. Speaking of which, Green Arrow even asks the Martian Manhunter, are you glad you didn't bring you-know-who? We find out at the end of the episode he's referring to Martian Manhunter's niece, Megan. Why does Martian Manhunter not bring his niece? Does he think she's not ready? At the end of the episode, why does he bring his niece? It really doesn't ever explain why he thinks that she doesn't need to be here, and then at the end of the episode he just makes her part of the team anyway. At first I was thinking maybe Megan isn't mature enough to be part of the Justice League, and that's why he's not bringing her on the same day that all these guys are coming. But it's very clear to me that Robin and Kid Flash are both not really at the level to be in the Justice League, and Speedy, he may think he's an adult, but he's really just a whiny crybaby, and he certainly doesn't have any place in the Justice League. I can't really use the maturity thing as a reason why the Martian Lady Hunter isn't brought into the Justice League with these other guys. Moving on to a little bit of a nitpick. There's one part in the episode where, as Aqualad, Kid Flash, and Robin are in the depths of Cadmus, and Robin hacks into their computer to find out what these monsters are that are hanging up on the wall. Instantly, he finds their stats: super strength, able to produce electricity, things that any employee of Cadmus would already know. So why, when Cadmus is putting all of this information into their database, would they make that information so readily available? Any employee who would be looking at this information would already know what the genomes are capable of. Why is this information here other than for expository purposes? When the Teen Titans find Robin, they read on the computer screen that it takes 16 weeks to grow a clone. Later, Dr. Desmond tells his overlords, the Light, that he has kidnapped the Teen Titans and that he wants to know what to do with them. They tell him he needs to kill them and clone them and then send the clones back to replace the originals. Then they can use these guys to serve the Light. Okay, if it takes 16 weeks to create a Superboy clone, in theory, wouldn't it take that long at least to create an Aqualad clone or a Kid Flash clone? What are you going to do in that 16-week period? The Justice League are going to be turning the planet upside down looking for their sidekicks. And when these clones who are going to replace the sidekicks come back and say, hey, sorry we were gone for 16 weeks, do you think the Justice League is just going to say, oh, don't worry about it, you probably had a good reason to not tell us where you were? No. I think this is something that the writers probably just overlooked when they were writing the script. Maybe the 16 weeks thing was put in later when they were trying to think of a good number for the lifespan of a clone. At several times in the episode, Robin is talking about the word whelmed. He says something like, oh, he's overwhelmed, you're underwhelmed, why can't anyone just be whelmed? And twice, this is kind of funny. It's interesting to hear Robin turn these words in such a way. After a while, that whole whelmed thing has overstayed its welcome. You see what I did there? But seriously, don't do the whole word thing every episode, Robin. Please, you're better than that. We find out that this whole thing has been staged by a Cadmus creature called Dubolex. It might be pronounced Double X. If it is, well, I'm probably going to keep saying Dubolex. You see, Dubolex started a fire on the surface of Cadmus. Cadmus is this huge underground facility that has a small building as its surface Cadmus. Dubolex started this fire, hoping that somebody would come to investigate the fire and would somehow discover the existence of the 52 floors below the ground, and then they would somehow discover Superboy and free him. How did Dubolex know that any of these things were going to happen? What would have happened if regular firefighters had discovered the underground complex? Dr. Desmond probably would have just had them killed and he wouldn't have batted an eyelash. Would Dubolex have felt bad because some normal dudes who were putting out the fire were put to death because of his actions? Dubolex seems very convinced that somebody in the superhero community was going to come and free Superboy, and yet, whenever he discovers the Teen Titans, like 3 feet away from Superboy, he tries to stop them. Now, I have a theory. Maybe Double X is trying to take over Cadmus. At the end of the episode, Guardian is put in charge of Cadmus, and then the members of The Light say that they have subtle ways of keeping control of him. If Double X was really not even concerned with freeing Superboy and was actually just trying to get rid of Dr. Desmond, well, all of his actions in the episode make a lot more sense. But that's not given to us. We just have to assume that maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Personally, I think it'd actually be an interesting twist if Double X was revealed to be evil and maybe working for the Light, maybe trying to subvert them. As is, all we can assume is that he's this good guy who's trying to free Superboy and give the genomes hope, and by doing all of this stuff, he was somehow able to see exactly what would happen actually did happen. When Double X is asking Superboy, "What do you choose?" Superboy's line, "I choose freedom," is really corny. How did they not catch that when that line was being recorded and or written? Did they think, boy, that's really awesome, we can put that into commercials and everything? Superboy has already made his attempt to escape when he frees the other three guys and they're running away. Why does Double X even take the time to ask him, "What do you choose?" Clearly he chooses freedom by his actions, don't you think? When we first see Dr. Desmond, he's working on something that's called Project Blockbuster. Now, in the comics, Blockbuster was this big, huge dude with his clothes being ripped. He basically looked like a non-green version of the Hulk for DC. And when I saw this word on the vial, I was like, oh no, is this going to be a season-long mystery? What is Project Blockbuster? No, I'm really glad that this episode went ahead and used that here instead of making that some weird season-long arc. Blockbuster may be a lot of fun as a Hulk ripoff, but he's definitely not worthy of a season-long arc. Kudos to you, Season 1, Episode 1, for using Blockbuster now and not seeding that for later use down the line. Really, I just don't care that much about the mystery of The Light. I think it's a weird thing to call your big bads for the series. That is, if they are the big bads of the series. I think it would have just worked fine if these guys were normal board members who had multiple branches of Cadmus all over the world, and then whenever Guardian is put in charge of this one, they say something mysterious like, okay, we've lost one branch, but we can use all these others to try and take it back. I just think it's kind of dumb, and after seeing the second episode of this series, I'm really worried that Cadmus was being hinted at as being this season-long arc, and then they're not going to get back to it. Maybe it comes back down the line. We'll see. Personally, I would have rather seen Cadmus as an ongoing thing in this series. I really like what I've read of Cadmus from the 1990 Superboy comics, and I think it would have been awesome to see Guardian trying to take back this organization and turn it into a force for good. Instead, what we have is, well, he takes it back, and then the Light is all like, yeah, don't worry, that's okay. All in all, I think this series could have taken a few leaves out of the books of the Teen Titans cartoon and the Justice League Unlimited cartoon. In a way, both of those shows were very arc-driven, but at the same time, you could watch any given episode of that series and it would make sense by itself. I feel like if I just watched episode 5 of this series, it wouldn't make any sense if I, A, haven't read hundreds and hundreds of DC comics, and B, haven't watched the rest of the series. I understand that when you're watching live action, it's really ridiculous to assume that you can just jump in halfway into the season and anything will make sense. To be fair, that is ridiculous, considering you can't do that. But in animation, I really wish you could just create these standalone episodes like the Teen Titans or Justice League Unlimited cartoon, while also having a season-long or series-long arc. I think that could be a really easy thing to do, considering it's been done before. X-Men Evolution did it, Teen Titans, Justice League Unlimited. This episode was enjoyable. I really like Cadmus. I like Superboy as a clone, although as a personality I think he's extremely cliche. He acts a whole lot like Speedy. Did you notice that? I think this series will maybe potentially be fun to watch, but I'm not sure how long I can last. Having said that, just remember, if you're ever fighting in a Trojan War, don't say that you could have done everything all by yourself when you clearly couldn't have won without Poseidon's help. It might just cost you to get home 10 years later. I'll see you next time.